I just found out that my boyfriend, 21M, has been cheating on me 20 hundreds, possibly thousands of times in our 7-month relationship. I don't know what to do. This turned out to be much longer than I anticipated, so I apologize for that. I began typing and then just could not stop. If you do not wish to read the entire post, the first 2 paragraphs mainly provide context regarding our relationship. However, I would genuinely appreciate it if you could take the time to read and respond. Ever since I discovered this situation about 2 weeks ago, I have been searching online for someone who has shared their experience regarding something similar to mine, but surprisingly, I have found nothing. Therefore, I decided to write my own post to hopefully assist not only myself, but also potentially help someone else who may encounter a similar experience. For some background, I met my current boyfriend almost 2 years ago on Tinder, of all places. We had just started college at different universities in the same state. Although our colleges were relatively far apart, our parents lived only about 30 minutes away from each other, allowing us to spend time together on weekends. The initial conversations between us were absolutely amazing. I felt incredibly fortunate. I had dreamed of finding someone like him for as long as I could remember. I understand that many of you might be in heterosexual relationships and may not fully grasp this, but it can be incredibly challenging to find a good and compatible same-sex partner, especially in the southern region of the United States. Anyway, fast forward 3 months. During that time, I was grappling with some mental health issues and family challenges, which prevented me from putting in the necessary effort required for a new relationship, leading us to stop communicating in March of last year. In the 10 months between our initial conversations and when we resumed talking, I reconnected with my former girlfriend, who is 19 years old. I'm honestly unsure why I did this, considering my relationship with her was profoundly unhealthy. However, since I was struggling mentally at the time, I believe I craved familiarity rather than what would truly be beneficial for me. To sum it up, that relationship was exceedingly toxic and unhealthy. She exhibited emotional abuse, and there were even instances of physical abuse. Despite that tumultuous situation, I never forgot about the guy from Tinder. I yearned to be with him so desperately, and in hindsight, perhaps I was engaging in a form of infidelity because I was thinking about him while still with her. Anyway, fast forward again to January of this year. I had finally ended things with her for good. She had drained so much of my energy. I felt utterly exhausted, but was incredibly relieved that it was finally over. Towards the end of January, I received a text from the guy I had met on Tinder. It turned out he had also just emerged from a rather unhealthy relationship. I cannot express how happy I was that he reached out. I had contemplated reaching out to him from the moment things ended with my girlfriend, but I must admit I was a coward. I feared that he would not want to be with me anymore after I left. The timing felt impeccable. Not to exaggerate, but it felt like fate. We began talking again, and it was even better than before. I had idolized this man in my mind for nearly a year without any contact with him. He remained everything I had ever wanted. We started dating in March, just a couple of months after resuming our conversations. To be honest, I cannot express how utterly perfect he was. My image of him had been idolized for so long that he exceeded my twisted perception of him. Again, I do not wish to overstate, but our relationship felt absolutely flawless. He consistently did and said all the right things. He showed immense patience with me, especially since I had experienced relationship trauma from my previous situation with my girlfriend. I felt a love for him that I did not know was possible, like the kind where it feels overwhelming just to look at the person, compelling you to look away. The type where kissing them sends electric sensations throughout your entire body. It genuinely felt like I was living in one of those teenage queer novels I used to read at 14. For the first time in my life, he made me feel deserving of love. He demonstrated what love and a relationship should genuinely feel like. Fast forward to October. We were heading to a haunted house when he wanted to stop at a gas station to use the restroom. He had misplaced his phone in my car, so I told him I would look for it while he was in the bathroom. I found his phone relatively quickly, and as soon as I did, I felt an unusual urge to go through it. It was a compulsion I had not experienced since my previous relationship, where I discovered my ex-girlfriend was also cheating on me. It felt strange to feel that urge because the thought of my boyfriend betraying me was simply incomprehensible. I was never worried about it, and any doubts I did have were easily dismissed as insecurities stemming from my past experiences. Anyway, I checked his recent photos folder and noticed a couple of screenshots of shirtless men from Instagram, which struck me as odd. Then I looked at his hidden folder and found an overwhelming number of screenshots. Thousands upon thousands of images, ranging from attractive Instagram men to explicit content from Twitter, including inappropriate photos shared with him on Snapchat. I couldn't even scroll to the top of the folder because of the sheer volume of images. I closed his phone and tried to focus on something else until he returned to the car, not wanting to risk him discovering my actions and deciding to delete anything. The following night, I waited for him to fall asleep, then took both of our phones to the restroom. I re-examined his hidden photo folder and discovered not only explicit screenshots of photos sent to him on Snapchat, but also images from Grindr and Tinder dated throughout our relationship. In fact, there were screenshots from Tinder from the very night I asked him to be my boyfriend, along with conversations he had with other men while we were on vacation together. In total, from January to October, there were over 20,000 photos, including screenshots of men from Instagram, explicit content from Twitter, and conversations from Snapchat, Grindr, and Tinder. After examining his photo app, I checked his Snapchat and saw about 10 consistent men that he had been communicating with, either near his college or his home. It appeared he had been consistently engaging with them, making plans to meet up, or sending pictures. Feeling that there might be more individuals involved, I logged out of his primary account to see if he had a secondary account, which he did, naturally. Upon logging into the alternate account, I discovered he had thousands of friends from across the country, most of whom he had communicated with at some point during our relationship, some more consistently than others. I checked his Instagram and found no direct messages from men on his main account, but I noticed he had 5 alternate accounts, each with several men he regularly interacted with and exchanged photos. I installed Grindr on his phone since it had been deleted at the time. Similar to the previous findings, the most recent conversations dated back only a day prior. However, there were again hundreds of messages and discussions. One of the more unsettling discoveries was a message timestamped from when we dined out during vacation. He had gone to the bathroom during our date to chat with other men on Grindr. He possessed a documents application that I explored, which contained hundreds of folders for individual men. Among this collection of names was my own. It was almost an unsettling experience. Each folder contained photos of the respective individuals from Snapchat and Grindr. Additionally, he had an app called Telegram, which I had never encountered before. It resembled a messaging platform, but all the contacts were people he would send and receive intimate photos from. He was also part of several porn group chats. The extent of everything was honestly mind-boggling. The following morning, I confronted him about it. I caught him in one lie after another. His deceptions were so perfectly constructed. I began by asking him if he had ever cheated on me, resting my head on his chest to listen to his heartbeat. His heart rate did not waver in the slightest when he assured me that he had always been loyal and would never do anything to harm me. He later explained to me that he had developed an addiction to collecting screenshots of men, and that it had been this way for years. He confessed to using Grindr frequently and talking to men on Snapchat regularly. He claimed he enjoyed making arrangements to meet up with people, although he never actually went through with it. I find it hard to believe that, but he has maintained this narrative to this day. I sense that if the chance to hook up with one of these men presented itself, he would certainly take it. He told me all of this had nothing to do with me and that he loves me, but that is difficult to accept. However, in some ways, I do tend to believe him. I feel the sheer magnitude of the situation makes it less personal than being cheated on with 1 or 2 individuals. I asked him if he had ever reflected on whether this behavior was wrong and would hurt me, and he said no. He claimed he did not think of me while engaging in these acts. He asserted that it was merely an impulse he could not control, and that he felt compelled to act on it to alleviate it. I would greatly appreciate your advice. Does he have a deeper psychological issue? This has to extend beyond simple infidelity. Since I confronted him, he claims he is changing and assures me that it will never happen again. I know this sounds cliché. He has also begun attending therapy. I realize it may sound foolish, but I truly love him and want to be with him. I want to remain in this relationship, but I undeniably have my doubts. I would be grateful to hear any thoughts, opinions, advice, or overall feedback on this situation. Story 2. This Romeo, Mrs. Juliet, wish you were here. I understand that this is a lengthy reflection on the concept of first world problems, but I have never stopped thinking about her, and I yearn for what could have been. It seems to be the uncertainty that weighs heavily on my mind. I found myself at the Friday night skate at the ice rink where I first learned to play hockey. Now, at 37 years old, I had started my skating journey at the age of 5. During my teenage years, I also taught ice hockey at a skills camp in Canada, where I met my first wife. Tragically, she passed away when we were in our late 20s, and it left me shattered. I spent the next 10 years isolating myself from friends, family, and coworkers. I even abandoned everything and everyone for an extended period, attempting to travel alone, hitching rides or utilizing train cars when I could. Eventually, I reintroduced myself to social life and attempted to date again, but my efforts were sporadic and ultimately fruitless. I reached a point of exhaustion with it all. Despite my interest, I constantly seemed to get hurt. Fast forward, at 36, I embarked on a long road trip with a friend when I fortuitously encountered an incredible woman. Ironically, just the night before we met, I had sworn off dating completely and resolved to embrace my solitude. However, upon meeting her, I instantly fell in love, and we started a physical relationship. I expressed my admiration for her and assured her of my commitment. As a divorced mother, she was understandably cautious, having encountered empty promises before. I endeavored to be as understanding and respectful as possible, and after much persistence, she finally agreed to a relationship on the condition that I would also date other women, as she recognized that being with her would mean sacrificing my chances of having children of my own. I understand. Most men might jump at this opportunity, yet that simply isn't who I am. I'm the type of person who believes in being with one woman. Nevertheless, she made me promise that I would try dating other people. I kept my word, even attempting a few outings. Unfortunately, I found both women delightful, but they didn't feel right for me. I honored my commitment, even with a date lined up for Friday night, but she canceled last minute. So I decided to go ice skating instead. It was a fantastic workout and always a lot of fun, especially since I had been focusing on my fitness. Upon arriving at the rink, a wave of memories washed over me. I laced up and took to the nearly empty ice, save for a few determined couples awkwardly navigating the boards. I plugged in my earbuds and began to glide. Near the end of the session, while circling the far end of the rink, just past the goal line, I heard a noise that anyone familiar with hockey or skating dreads above all else: the sickening thud of someone hitting the ice. It was deafening. I could hear it over the music blaring through my noise-canceling headphones. I turned around and spotted a man sprawled out on the ice, surrounded by a group of concerned onlookers. Since there was no ice patrol on duty at this rink, I took it upon myself to check on him. He was completely out, arms extended in front of him, knocked out cold. I instructed everyone to back off just as he began to regain consciousness. I assured him to stay still for a moment, but he insisted he was okay. I noticed the signs of a concussion taking effect, so I helped him to skate over to the lobby area and asked him where he lived and how he planned to get home. He mentioned that he was on a date and intended to drive both the woman and her friend home, pointing at two gorgeous women who were watching with apparent worry. I offered to drive all of them home first, then take him to an urgent care facility or to his house. I insisted he should not drive, especially after a blow to the head, and he finally agreed. We all climbed into my truck. As promised, I dropped off the two women first, who happened to be from France and were only in town for a couple of months. Following that, I took the guy, Brett, to a local urgent care facility. I shared my contact information with him along with a note detailing who I was, what happened, and the location of his car, and then I called it a night. I felt a sense of fulfillment for helping that stranger, even though his date had not gone well. The following day at work, I received a message from an unknown number. I read it once, twice, and then again. It was one of the French women from the previous night expressing her admiration for my willingness to assist a stranger and inviting me to dinner as a gesture of gratitude. Remembering my promise, I replied that it was no inconvenience, but I would be delighted to go. I might have mentioned previously that she was strikingly beautiful, like a dream come to life. I reminded myself of all the kind words I had shared with that first woman, how I had pursued her until she agreed to be with me, and how I had taken on the role of a positive adult figure in her children's lives. I had permission to date, but this felt different. At dinner, I found myself enchanted by her voice. It was light and delightful, capable of bringing a smile even when I heard it on voicemail. She often sang in public, disregarding anyone's opinions of her talent, which was considerable as she was classically trained with a stunning voice. I couldn't stop staring at this extraordinary person sitting across from me. She embodied everything I had ever hoped for. No children, well-educated, well-traveled, humorous, intelligent, resourceful, creative, breathtakingly beautiful, with an incredible physique and an energy I longed for when I was away from it. Our dinner was delightful. Afterward, we took a walk on the beach at Golden Gardens, and then came the moment. She asked to kiss me. What did I say in response? I said I couldn't, out of fear of my feelings. She accepted this and gracefully exited my truck. I was left speechless by my own principles and morals, causing me to drive away without looking back. Yet I couldn't shake her voice, her lingering scent in my truck, or the image of her captivating eyes that raced through my mind all night. She sent me a message the next morning apologizing for being so forward, and I suggested we meet in person to discuss it further. She inquired if I would like to have another dinner, and I readily agreed. During our next dinner, I opened up about everything and expressed that I didn't believe I could provide her with a future. She asked, "But what about the present? Can you give me that, and we can figure out the future when it arrives?" I was entranced by her eyes once again, realizing there was no way I could turn her down this time. The connection we shared was unlike anything I had experienced before. I felt real electric currents coursing through my body when she touched me. I had never been with someone so stunning, both inside and out. She embodied a genuinely kind and beautiful soul, and her uniqueness matched her physical beauty. I fell deeply in love with her, and we began to see each other every day until the moment came when that first woman informed me that she wanted me to move in with her, 1,000 miles away, and was open to an exclusive relationship, which was precisely what I had been seeking. Faced with this decision, I realized I had to choose between them. I feared that if I moved, things might deteriorate, and I lacked trust in how things would turn out with the first woman if I relocated with her and her children. I also felt it was premature and impulsive to choose the second woman, especially considering I had become a father figure to the kids of the first woman and had promised them I would never abandon them. They had asked me to pledge that, and I did. Regrettably, or perhaps fortuitously, I figured I owed it to the first woman and her children to keep my promise. 6 years later, we are still deeply in love and together. I love her and the kids immensely and remain a positive male role model for them, loving them unconditionally. Nonetheless, there is a part of me, the romantic I am, that continues to yearn for my Juliet. A piece of me dreams of her touch and her face. I wish I had known how fleeting our time would truly be. Had I known it would be our last moments together, I honestly don't know if I would have wanted to know then. The time we shared was the most rewarding of my life, and I am incredibly grateful for those memories. In an alternate timeline or life, I would have given anything to build a life beside her. I made promises, kept them, and love my life now, but a small part of my heart will always remain lonely, curious, and longing for my Juliet. So, my dear, wherever you are and whatever you are doing, I miss you, love you still, and think of you every single day. I cherish everything you ever gave me, every note, every photograph, every gift, even the little hand-warmer drawing you made to keep me warm until I could see you in April, even if that never happened. Believe me, it was not about you, nor was it due to a lack of something you offered. It was not a matter of differing views concerning the world or our collective future, and it was certainly not from a lack of desire. I loved those children dearly and felt obligated to them after essentially entering their lives and becoming an important figure to both them and their mother. I chose what seemed to be the selfless option, hoping to provide those children a better understanding of and interaction with adults than I ever experienced, possibly sparing them from the same scars I carried from my childhood abandonment. I aimed to do the right thing. I fulfilled my promises to her and to them, and I truly am sorry that you had to endure suffering as a consequence. I had never dated two women simultaneously before, and I never will again. I am not the type of person built to hurt others. Wherever you may be now, my sweet Juliet, I wish you happiness, health, and love. I miss you every single day. Every single day. Story 3. Vent. I did not know I was the third party. I am a 33-year-old female who has been using dating applications intermittently for several years. Last year, I casually dated a man named Peter, who is 31 years old. He was visiting my country and left shortly after our time together. We maintained contact for a month while he was away, but once he returned to his home country, I realized that my feelings for him were somewhat obsessive. His actions made it clear that he was not what I needed, so I asked him to stop communicating. He called me complicated for wanting him to communicate better. I had expressed that certain things bothered me and that he had changed since our time together. I wanted to pursue something more substantial, but he neither committed nor rejected me. He simply strung me along until I decided to end it myself. After that, I ceased all communication. During this period of no contact, I explored other relationships, traveled, and experienced moments of depression where I questioned why this was happening to me. Then something traumatic occurred, forcing me to relocate to a new town. I had to start over and lost a significant amount of savings, and my travel plans were put on hold. I refrained from dating for several months after moving and deleted all dating applications. Then he messaged me. 9 months later, he broke our silence the day after Christmas, telling me he was back in the town where we met. I could only assume he had reached out to me among many other women he had met while he was in my country, treating his message like spam. Again, he played games instead of being straightforward or offering an apology. I experienced a panic attack upon receiving his message. Days later, I responded and concluded our conversation by asking him not to contact me again, although all I truly wanted was for him to express that he missed me and wanted to see me again. As the new year approached, I re-downloaded Tinder, went on a couple of dates, and then encountered a man named Rocky, a 40-year-old who resembled Peter. I typically date for long-term relationships and avoid polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, open relationships, and short-term encounters. However, I was experiencing heightened libido since Peter's communication, so I swiped right on Rocky. We matched minutes later, and he immediately inquired about my plans for the evening. I was busy but could meet him the next day. Though he tried to be coy about meeting, I insisted on clarity about his intentions for our meeting. I was looking for a hookup after 7 months of complete celibacy, as I refrain from any intimacy or physical contact until exclusivity is established. Unfortunately, Rocky did not fit my type for anything beyond a hookup, especially considering his resemblance to Peter. The following night after I was free, I messaged him. He took some time to respond, which was later than I typically prefer. He misunderstood and thought I was going straight to his hotel. I had suggested meeting him earlier, and he agreed, so I told him where and when to meet. He claimed he was on his way out and asked for my number, then requested that I message him. However, he provided me with an incorrect phone number and appeared to delete his Tinder account. 5 minutes later, as I was already walking away from the meeting point, he messaged me. His contact name differed from his Tinder profile, and when I questioned him about it, he gave me some excuses. I felt uneasy about the entire exchange but dressed up and was very attracted to him, drawing attention from passers-by on the street. He still made me wait, as he hadn't left the hotel yet and would pick me up in another 20 minutes. He called me to assure me he was not a catfish, and eventually he arrived. I was shocked and cold when I saw him. He looked strikingly like Peter, but the chemistry was absent. Although his voice was deep, it lacked the accent I had become familiar with. They really resembled each other, or could it have been my mind playing tricks? We took a taxi to avoid wasting any more time and headed straight to his hotel. He kept talking about himself and attempted small talk, while I remained distant, providing short responses. Upon arriving at his hotel, he seemed to expect me to exit the vehicle. I simply stayed seated until he realized he needed to open the door. He apologized and jumped out to do so. As we walked through the lobby, I half expected security to stop me and request identification or payment for visitation, but luckily that did not occur. On our way to his room, he made a joke about having an elderly uncle we needed to drag out, which turned out to be no joke at all. The uncle was indeed asleep in one of the beds. I left the room and asked Rocky to step outside to talk. I informed him that this situation was unacceptable, firstly because the uncle was elderly and it was late, and secondly because he had indicated he could host us for a hookup. He asked if I wanted to go somewhere else, and I agreed, but suggested we inquire about booking another room since that would be simpler. We headed back to the lobby, where they had a room available. However, he did not have a card on file, even though he had said previously that he did. The room was registered under his uncle's name, and the card he used failed to process. He mentioned that he had more cards in the room, so I paused him to clarify. "There are too many unsettling things happening right now. Is there more family in the hotel?" He replied no. "Are you married?" He answered no. "Are you polyamorous or partnered?" He said no. "Well, if that card does not work, I'm calling it a night. I've already waited too long, and you bear a striking resemblance to my much younger ex. I don't know if that is a compliment or not, but he must be very attractive," I stated. He apologized for the waiting and all the hiccups, and acknowledged the issue with the card, promising to arrange for my cab. He returned, the card went through, and he glanced at my ID as he handed it back. We headed to the room. During our time together, he told me many stories that did not quite align. He mentioned scars on his body, past accidents, injuries, and his activities during those times. I typically dislike smokers, but he had a lighter and a vape, confessed to using marijuana, and had a Stanley cup filled with beer that he had been consuming throughout the day. I was already in the room when all this information came to light, and I asked him to shower before we proceeded. He complied, and we engaged in mutual pleasure, showering together multiple times throughout the night. We used every towel and sheet in the room, staying awake until morning in each other's arms, conversing, kissing, caressing, and laughing during breaks. When we cuddled, we began the cycle of intimacy all over again. He was intent on satisfying my every whim and desire until pleasure was achieved multiple times. Later, after having slept a bit while lying next to him, I began to feel sore and exhausted. He grabbed his phone and started reading texts from his uncle and other individuals, and to my shock, he was tracking a woman's location. When I woke, he mentioned that his uncle had messaged him, furious that he still had the card he used for the room and couldn't access breakfast. I got up, showered, and prepared to leave, feeling sore and achy. He offered me money for my taxi, which made me quite uncomfortable, and he accompanied me to the lobby. Instead, I took the bus as I passed by, hardly speaking but urging him to hurry and return the card to his uncle because he needed food. He kissed me goodbye on the lips and instructed me to text him as I dashed across the street. I told my friend, who was aware of my whereabouts throughout the night. She later discovered him and his wife of 8 years on social media. Many of the things he had said were false, half-truths, or omissions. I chose not to respond, but noticed that he activated his Tinder account again the same day, as he reappeared in my matches. At the beginning, he had claimed he was leaving the following weekend after Valentine's Day. I reached out to him in the afternoon on Valentine's Day, as he had not attempted to contact me and had switched his profile to looking for new friends, just days before I messaged. I received a very rude response later that evening and was promptly blocked. On Tinder, I noticed that his location had changed to his home country. I called him out on the app, and hours later he replied, claiming he hadn't said anything and that it was his jealous uncle who deleted everything, seizing his phone while he was in the shower. I asserted that I knew the truth and that there was no point in lying to me, not mentioning his marital status, but implying if she knew. He apologized for the chaos and insisted he was clean, attributing the messages to his uncle, who had supposedly deleted the texts. I genuinely hope I am not pregnant or unwell. It was my week off the contraceptive pill, and I had never been intimate without protection before him. I cannot fathom why, after our first encounter, I felt compelled to be unprotected with him. I am filled with shame, anger, sadness, and intrigue regarding his wife, who is stunning. I cannot believe someone like her would permit such behavior. I doubt they are polyamorous or practicing ethical non-monogamy. I now question everything and feel tormented by the guilt of my decisions when all the signs were there warning me against them. the pleasure I experienced in his company, and everything that transpired in that room haunts me even more. I apologize, M. If you are unaware of this situation, you do not deserve any of this. To summarize, I am a 33-year-old female who had a brief sexual encounter with a 40-year-old man who denied being married, only for me to later discover he has been married for 8 years. Story 4. Help me, a 35F, understand my 37M partner's shitty behavior before I make my next move. I need to comprehend my partner's 37M behavior before I, 35F, determine my next steps. Allow me to elaborate. My father, 58M, was often challenging to be around during my upbringing. It felt like walking on eggshells. You could never predict his mood, and while I loved him deeply, it really impacted our relationship. He was quite successful and provided well for our family, but that also came with a significant amount of stress, which undoubtedly exacerbated his behavior. Fast forward to my early to mid-20s, and my father is diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Initially, we all found it amusing because we only understood the stereotype of ADHD, which did not align with him. I began researching, and suddenly it felt as if I was uncovering answers to issues I had faced my entire life. It was truly transformative. My father, one of my siblings, and I ended up being diagnosed and placed on medication. With the help of specialists, medication, and his newfound self-knowledge, my father became a different person. He was calmer, happier, and more transparent about his struggles, leading to a significant improvement in our relationship. Do not misunderstand me. He still experiences occasional outbursts and says inappropriate things, but I confront him about it, and he apologizes. Alternatively, I try to understand that he feels overwhelmed in those situations and has limited control over his reactions. He always recognizes his behavior, apologizes, and discusses it. Now, regarding my partner, we started our relationship in our early 20s and quickly and unexpectedly had a son. The relationship was toxic, and he epitomized narcissism. He was controlling, paranoid, and constantly belittled me, making me feel insignificant. I left when our son was about 6 months old and moved in with my parents. This was around the time all the ADHD diagnoses occurred. During the initial years, my partner was relentless, attempting every possible way to make my life miserable while using my son as leverage to get me to interact with him. He was never violent or dangerous with our son. Eventually, the situation calmed down, he got the message and ceased his pursuit. We could manage drop-offs amicably, and this continued for several years. I had nearly forgotten how difficult he had been when one day, I asked him to bring our son to my apartment blindfolded when he dropped him off because I had a surprise for him, bunnies. He brought our son in and ended up staying and playing with him and the bunnies for a while. This occurrence became more frequent, and eventually, as the lease on his apartment was ending and he hadn't found a new place in time, he desperately requested to stay at my home for a while. Fast forward 5 years, and we have been back in a relationship ever since. To my surprise, our relationship is nothing like it once was. Although we face issues, they are nothing compared to the past. We now have a 2-year-old daughter in addition to our 13-year-old son. At one point, while researching ADHD, I became convinced that he had it. I still believe so and have shared this with him, to which he responded, "Yeah, maybe." But he dismisses it and shows no interest in pursuing anything about it. My primary concern is my rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Any remotely negative comments directed at me feel like a stab to the heart. I dwell on them for days, feeling terrible about myself, while he quickly forgets he said anything at all. He often makes hurtful remarks when he is stressed, leaving me feeling sad and worthless. He enjoys talking endlessly about various topics that interest him, most of which I have absolutely no interest in, such as cars, politics, and gaming. Because I tend to be a people pleaser, I smile, endure it, and listen for as long as he wants to talk, even though my ADHD makes focusing extremely challenging. When I try to converse, I almost always receive a mumbled, "Yeah," while he stares at his phone. There is rarely any interest or effort on his part, so I have stopped sharing anything with him. When he feels stressed, he tends to express it verbally and often takes it out on everyone, exhibiting behavior similar to my father's. This happens far too often. He is the youngest of 7 siblings, mostly brothers, who would often recount the bullying they experienced growing up. Everything he did seemed to warrant punishment from his brothers for simply being embarrassing or for no reason at all. I firmly believe he now adopts that same mentality toward our son and treats him like a younger brother. No, he is never physically or verbally abusive towards him. He will never outright compliment me or acknowledge anything I have accomplished. If he is in a good mood, he may show gratitude and kindness, but nothing beyond that. However, he does sometimes speak highly of me to others, which I learn from them. For instance, my son once told me his father stated I was much better at reverse parking than he was. I was genuinely surprised, because he would never relay such a compliment directly to me. He often behaves competitively about various matters, who is feeling more ill, who is working harder, etc., but I never engage with it. A lot of it is emotionally immature nonsense that I have learned to ignore and brush off. However, I find it challenging to overlook the belittling and cruel comments when he feels overwhelmed or stressed. That is something I truly struggle to dismiss, and it is a significant issue for me. I feel as though I extend him considerable grace for his bad behavior and make excuses for him, only to be criticized and blamed for everything he is unhappy about. He frequently wants to go out and plan trips, yet he often cancels at the last minute. He makes promises he fails to keep or changes his mind on a whim. He is impulsive with money, purchasing expensive clothing and shoes for our son, as well as gaming consoles and accessories. He bought a $60,000 car when I had just given birth to our daughter and was unemployed. He spends exorbitant amounts on alterations for his car, which he only drives on weekends since he has a company vehicle. Meanwhile, I'm managing the kids in a 2010 Mazda 2 with peeling paint and gearbox issues. I am not worried about driving that car. I am content to make sacrifices to be home with my children during their early years. I did the same with my son. I tried childcare when he turned 1, but everything about it felt wrong. I decided that if I could make it work to stay home with my children until they became more independent, that would be the best choice for me. He had no issue with this until recently, when he began bringing up that I am on vacation and do nothing. He usually says this when he is stressed. I receive a very modest income from government assistance, which goes straight towards rent and groceries. We still split the rent and grocery costs evenly, even though he earns significantly more. He insists he works hard, so he should be able to spend money on whatever he desires. The problem is that he contributes only the bare minimum to cover necessities. I devote considerable time and effort to budgeting to maximize the little I do have. When he goes grocery shopping alone, it typically consists of chips, snacks, and non-essential items instead of actual food that could sustain the family for dinners, etc. He often claims how much extra he has contributed, but it never amounts to anything substantial. I usually consider myself resilient. I have endured a lot and tolerated much. However, I am reaching a point where I genuinely detest him. I need to understand him and the reasons behind his behavior, but he isn't open to seeking help or exploring these issues. For my own peace of mind and understanding, I need clarity on what is driving his behavior so I can establish boundaries. Much of it is eerily familiar and reminds me of my father in the earlier days, and a lot of it aligns with typical ADHD behavior, but I need to comprehend what is causing his overall conduct so I can delineate boundaries. I am fully aware of how my situation will sound to most people. If someone were being treated this way, I would want to advise them to leave. However, the situation is not so straightforward for me. He loves his children more than anything, and we are financially stable. If we were to separate, it would be extremely difficult financially, even nearly impossible when I return to work. The cost of living is exorbitant everywhere, especially here in Sydney. Lastly, I genuinely do not believe he is a bad person. I think he has either been conditioned to accept this behavior as normal or maybe on the spectrum and genuinely remains unaware of how he presents himself. He is socially awkward, avoids making eye contact during conversations, and tries to dodge unnecessary discussions unless he is comfortable with you, after which he can be incredibly talkative. I am unsure of what I am seeking in writing this anymore. If you have read through this entire post, I truly appreciate it and welcome your thoughts so that I can gain some different perspectives. Please be gentle with any critical remarks directed towards me, as I am extremely sensitive. Thank you in advance. Story 5. I catfished one of my high school teachers because he was bullying me. I was instructed to share this here. This incident occurred some time ago. To provide some context, he was acquainted with my father, who is a lawyer and had represented his ex-wife several years prior in a highly contentious divorce. For some reason, he directed that resentment toward me. He verbally assaulted me in front of the class. Whenever I raised my hand to respond to a question, he would roll his eyes before calling on me and loudly declare to the class, "Listen to what original poster says. That way, you will recognize the incorrect answers." He would find fault with my work, making disparaging remarks about how I would never achieve much because, clearly, I had a learning disability, which I did not. He was simply being unpleasant. I often received lower marks for my handwriting, but upon discussing with classmates, I learned that I was the only one penalized for that. I understand that history was not my strongest subject, but the treatment I received was entirely unjustified. I started experiencing anxiety about attending that class. I dreaded it throughout the day. My friends would often nonchalantly mention, "Yeah, Mr. Smith really dislikes original poster. What did you do to him, bro?" My father was furious that this teacher was clearly biased against me for something I had no involvement in. He made efforts to have me transferred to another class, but the school and district were already at capacity. I could not change classes without displacing another student, and the school did not believe that would be fair to that student. But somehow, allowing my situation to continue was considered fair to me. My father never disclosed specific details of his cases, but I overheard him angrily telling my mother, after our meeting with the principal, that he disliked having me in that deranged pedophiles class. This planted an idea in my mind, and it began to take shape. I developed a scheme. I collected social media pictures of a girl who was underage and attended a different school, and created profiles on KIK and WhatsApp using a Google Voice number from our city. I changed her name for obvious reasons. Once I had ensnared him with the fabricated 17-year-old girl, I forwarded all the chat logs and pictures he had sent her to the principal and the school district's main office using every email address I could find on the school district's website and social media accounts. Within 3 days of sending those emails, we had a substitute teacher. All we were informed was that Mr. Smith needed to take some time off due to personal matters. I still do not know what happened to him after that. I graduated about 3 months after he was placed on leave and never saw or heard from him again. I joined the military and left town about 6 months after all this transpired, and I have not returned to that city since. One of my friends, who still resides there, informed me some time ago that he saw him working the deli counter at a grocery store not far from the high school. I never confided in anyone, and nobody knows it was me. The rumor mill went into overdrive regarding him being a pedophile, but nobody was aware I had any involvement, even though I gained the most from his departure. I assume they tracked the girl down and questioned her, but she, of course, did not know him. However, the chat logs from WhatsApp show the girl informing him that she was 17 about 3 days before he sent the first of many images of his genitals. So that was likely sufficient to at least get him dismissed and lose his teaching certification. I do not regret my actions, but I would never go to such lengths against anyone again. I was a bitter, moody teenager. However, when you are being bullied by someone in a position of authority over you, you must do what you need to do to survive. Edit, I am male. Edit 2. I have been attempting to address all inquiries, so here are some responses to the main questions I am encountering. In the state where all of this took place, the age of consent is 16. Legally, he could have been romantically involved with her. My intention was never to get him in legal trouble. I merely wanted to disrupt his life enough to remove him from mine. That is all. I concede it was wrong for me to use her photos. I was 17 and did not know any girls I felt comfortable asking, "Hey, want to catfish Mr. Smith and ruin his life? Also, please don't tell anyone." I selected her because she attended a different school across town. I had met her at a couple of parties, and she had many mirror selfies posted on her Facebook and Instagram, which I needed to make it feel authentic to him. I only required 8-10 selfies, and another reason I chose her was that she was blonde with a slender physique. I managed to find numerous girls on Reddit who did not show their faces and fit that loose description. I used 2-3 pictures from one user's Gone Wild account when he pressed me for nude images. I informed him that the girl did not have any social media because she preferred older guys, and she did not want anyone to know, so I lacked social media to ensure their comfort. In retrospect, I feel he should have been suspicious of a 17-year-old girl without social media, so perhaps some of the responsibility lies with him as well. I obtained his cell phone number from a classmate who had it because he was one of the numerous assistant coaches for our football team. Most of the team members had it because they exchanged phone numbers during a retreat the team attended the previous summer. I texted him unexpectedly, stating that I had seen him at a football game our schools played earlier in the year and found him attractive. He gauged the situation initially, but it became clear after I sent the first selfie of hers that he was captivated. I would only send him a selfie if he begged for it genuinely, and the more he pleaded, the more flirtatious I became. We never engaged in sexting. I barely knew what to say at that age anyway. I would describe my approach as awkwardly forward. Additionally, I never explicitly requested nude photos. He arrived at that point by himself. It caught me off guard when he did. I communicated with him using the Google Voice number for some time, then told him my mother had read my texts but was unaware of WhatsApp or how it functioned. I did not even complete the entire pitch. He heard that and immediately proposed we communicate there, subsequently encouraging me to remove our regular text conversation once we were conversing on WhatsApp. To this day, I have no idea why my father called him a pedophile. Perhaps his ex-wife informed my father during her divorce proceedings about an incident involving him. The tone in which I heard him express that led me to believe that pursuing this route would be worthwhile. It is evident that his ex-wife, my father, took him to task in the divorce settlement, which ultimately triggered this entire series of events.